Today on Quite Franklin, my guest is Dr. Katariina Rosenblatt. She is a survivor of human sex trafficking. Now, prior to reading her book Stolen, and even implied by the name, I thought that sex trafficking was synonymous with abduction. But after reading her story, you realize, you know that sex trafficking happens right in front of you. You see this in neighborhoods beside you, but you realize after reading her book that it could literally be your next door neighbor that is trafficking young people and you wouldn't even know about it. She was recruited at the age of 13 in the sex trafficking industry. This is a woman who did not graduate high school. She went from earning her GED to earning her PhD. And she talks about how her faith, a Billy Graham Crusade, and where she met God and how her faith delivered her from this. But more importantly, this isn't a woman who just talks the talk. She actually walks the walk of the Christian faith. Her organization there is hopeforme.org, does outreach ministries in places like truck stops where human trafficking is happening on a daily basis, in places like jails and in places like strip clubs. And in my opinion, there's no better way or more ultimate way of showing Christ's love than them going into these strip clubs and literally washing the feet of the strippers who have to be on their feet all night long.
Quite frankly, it's kind of unusual.
It's quite Franklin.
Got it. Quite Franklin.
I wanted to tell you that in reading your book, the title of the book, Stolen, had me. So I don't know how familiar you are with my podcast, but I've had two guests on my podcast that are kind of in a similar space as this. I had Elizabeth Smart on. I'm sure you know who Elizabeth Smart is. Mm-hmm. And then I had a lady on by the name of Chandra Wawarantu, who was sex trafficked. Do you know her?
Yeah. We all kind of know each other, survivor leaders.
Yeah. And so I had Chandra on, and her story was just, unbelievable story. Mm-hmm. And so in these two instances, like in these two conversations that I've had with these women, I kind of developed this idea of what I thought sex trafficking was. Can you just give the broad brushstrokes for the listeners of how this whole process started for you, talking about the grooming and all that kind of stuff at a young age?
Sure. And thank you again for having me on your show. I did hear some of your other guests. It's very impressive. So I'm honored.
Well, thank you so much.
Sex trafficking can happen anywhere to anyone at any time. The majority, obviously, that are targeted is the majority that feeds demand, which is the ages between 12 and 14. That's the average age of entry into prostitution in the United States. And that is the age of demand for sex. As a man, I see your face, you're looking like, wow. Yeah, because men, unfortunately, are the buyers, the majority that are fueling the industry. However, men are not the only ones that are traffickers. There are also women traffickers, female traffickers. And in my story, I had 4 different experiences. 2 were female, and they were part of a trafficking ring. I got recruited at a hotel. I got recruited. You just have to be a vulnerable person to be targeted.
You talked about when you came out of the trafficking and when you started working with the church and how you were reluctant to tell all of your story at first. And you're just in this book brutally honest in such a good way about the stuff that had happened to you. So when you talk about vulnerability, and you talk about the average age of entry of kids that are 12 to 14 years of age, this vulnerability that you speak of, what creates, what kind of home environment creates this vulnerability? What was it in your life, these vulnerabilities that made you a prime suspect for somebody? Because you, in the book, the character that you reference and that you just referenced in the book, her name was Mary, and she was your groomer, quote unquote groomer, so to speak. So talk about these vulnerabilities, because this was a very calculated recruitment that came to you, not just some sort of accidental thing.
Absolutely. And Mary is not a fictional name. That was her real name. So on some of the characters, I was honest because I really don't care if her name is in the
There's no need in protecting them.
No, I don't want to protect her. I want to protect the innocent. However, in my case, I came from a vulnerable background of domestic violence. My family had domestic violence in it. My mom had been abused by my dad, and so she left him and took us to a hotel in Miami Beach. And that's where I was recruited by Mary and by this trafficking ring. That was an organized ring, organized crime ring. However, it doesn't have to be so blatant as a sex tourism ring or an organized crime trafficking ring. You're not going to identify it like that when you're a 13-year-old. You're going to look for love. You're going to look for a sense of belonging. So anybody that has those vulnerabilities, a need for care and attention, or even just food or a place to stay, could be vulnerable to being recruited, to being trafficked. And I actually used to do talks in the public school system here in Florida, and I found out of 300 students I spoke to, 19 had trafficking experiences, and 1 in 3 middle schoolers were being recruited, and 1 in 9 high schoolers through false friends, false boyfriends, false relationships. And so to answer your question, vulnerability starts in the home, just with a lack of love and belonging and basic needs.
I don't know if you know this, but I used to teach high school math, and just
Oh, I didn't know that.
looking at this from a teaching perspective, when I was teaching high school, there was so many times that I would have students, and I had a small group of students that would stick around my class and whatnot, or stop in after school or whatever. And it's like kids that are basically looking for attention, like kids that don't get that kind of attention from home. And your case was extreme because you talked about in the book, like you talked about your father, like the sexual abuse from your father. You talked about the physical and verbal abuse from your father. You talked about the sexual abuse that you encountered from your babysitter at a young age. But as I was reading this, I thought it doesn't necessarily take these extreme instances or these extreme experiences to create these, like, I guess you in your book, you refer to them as daddy holes, but any kind of vulnerability like that desire for value, right? I mean, that's what you're looking to be valued or loved by somebody, as you explained it in the book. And I was thinking about half of the kids that I taught and how many of these kids come from homes that you're just working in households where it's a 2-family income. Parents are busy. I got to be at work. I got to do this call. I got to work overtime. And they're looking for this validation somewhere. And how easily it could be to look and find that validation outside of the home, because the grooming process for you from Mary was such a slow process. It was like, first it started with, I guess, like words of affirmation, and then it started with, let's have some fun. And she kind of step by step processed you into this thing where the next step just didn't seem like that big of a leap from the one prior to. And as I was reading this, I thought, like, this can really happen to pretty much any kid.
I really love how you put that. As a practitioner in the field of anti-trafficking, I'm always thinking of new ways to explain to people the experiences that we've gone through. And so as survivors, and I think I'm going to, in my own time, research that a little bit, maybe put a plan of action together to help people understand that, breaking down that grooming process. Because the grooming process, when I did my PhD, I found that the average grooming period is a course of a month that it takes to gain a child's trust. But I really like how you put the blocks together, how you break down a child's guards, how you break down their own sense of protection by giving them the things that they're needing most. Whether it's words of affirmation, like you said, absolutely, it started there.
Yeah.
And then it was doing fun things,
yeah.
And then new experiences and building a bond, what they call a trauma bond. But I think I'm going to write more on that. So thank you for that incredible insight. I don't think there's been any work on that yet.
The reason why I say this, Kat, is because obviously you've lived this. This is your personal life experience. You went through this whole sex trafficking incident. But as I was reading it from an outsider, I would consider myself a fairly well-educated individual, and I'm informed on a lot of topics. And I feel like that because I've had two guests in this space and I've done a lot of reading about it, and given like, I don't know, the current political climate with all the, all the stuff that was going on with all the, the conspiracy theories of Pizzagate and all, the Epstein Island and all these things that have recently been in the news, computer servers and all that kind of stuff. Like, I've done a lot of deep diving into reading about these things. And I thought like, yeah, I kind of understand this for someone who's not had direct experience with it. Like, I understand it. And I think that a lot of people that hear about sex trafficking and stuff like that think the same way that I do. There was recently in Ohio, not more than, I would say probably 5 miles from my home, at this hotel in Blue Ash, which is a nice neighborhood, mind you. And in this hotel in Blue Ash, there was a sex trafficking ring where they had arrested, and grouped together and rescued, I don't know, more than like 30 or 35 different girls and women. And people outside of this space, like your readers and the people that you're educating, will think like me. Like, a woman, like somebody that's sex trafficked would be like an Elizabeth Smart or somebody like that, who, and I know that her case is different because that was an abduction, and they're gray areas, whatever, how you classify things. But the thought of like somebody being snatched or taken, like the movie Taken, like that's obviously what you think of in terms of sex trafficking. It's like, well, some young girl's who's inexperienced is gonna travel overseas. She doesn't know any better, and she gets taken. And it can happen in the US as well. But in reading your book, I was like, no, that's not how this happens. Like, you're literally just a normal teenage girl who, come from a broken family background, living in a hotel, and then you were approached by another young teenage girl that was roughly your age, and she just befriended you and slowly pulled you into this system. And the reason why I say this is because you made a comment in your book about young kids and social media. We have, like, you have access, the internet that we have. It's an amazing tool because you have access to everything in the world at the fingertips. And the moment that you give a kid a smartphone and you say, here you go, they literally have access to anything they want to have access to. But anything that wants to have access to them has access to them as well. So if there's any kind of kink in that armor of that child, of their confidence, of their value, of their basic love system at home or something like that, these people are experts in exploiting this stuff. And it's just your average kid. It's not about like, hey, meet me at the mall, and then suddenly they get snagged and you've never seen your child again. It didn't work like that with you. And I'm just sitting here the whole time I'm reading your book, scratching my head like, wow, this could happen to my next door neighbor. And my next door neighbor, that daughter could be coming home every night, like, or whatever, and as if things were just normal, unbeknownst to even her own family that she's being sex trafficked.
Absolutely. Or unbeknownst to her teachers or her school or educators. I've seen numerous stories where kids leave and go turn tricks, during school days, for their pimps. Their pimps pick them up outside of school. And there's either a brothel at a house. Like there were some kids that aged out of foster care and were recruited to be the pimps. And they recruited the young kids in the high school, the young boys, to get the girls. And they would skip classes and take the girls down to the brothel around the corner from the school, turn tricks with older men that were buying sex with these minors, and then take them back to school before school is over so they can get on the bus and go home. And their parents were never the wiser until a venereal disease came along or unwanted pregnancy.
There'd be a lot of people that are listening like, well, these girls are just, they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. They're just prostitutes. They're not victims. I'm playing, this is that role, like people that aren't involved, like they're not victims. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing.
And this is how my story is so different from stories like you mentioned, Chandra Wawantu, who was a guest on your show. We are at this age very vulnerable as minors, as teenagers. We're vulnerable. Like you said, we're hungry for love. We're hungry for a sense of belonging. Even the boys that I talked to at that particular high school in South Florida said, Miss, I just wanted a mentor. I wanted a mentor. I don't have a father. And they were being groomed to be little pimps. And so the girls are groomed by these little pimps in such a way that they really believe that these kids love them. The girls are hungry and starving for love. And let me tell you, Rich, love is the biggest drug of any drug out there. It's bigger than anything. If you've never had love in your life as a child, and all of a sudden this romantic partner comes along and he's taught how to win girls over. He's taught how to make them feel special. He's taught how to play them. And then those girls are so addicted to his love because they've never known love that they will do anything he says. And then the heroin is introduced, or in my case, it was cocaine. Cocaine is still used, but then they don't have to do any more work. The work is done because the addiction takes over. The girls don't even know half the time. I didn't know. I'm sure no 13-year-old decides to go and be a prostitute. It needs to be brought to the forefront for kids to understand, just because someone's nice to you or buys you something or makes you feel special, it doesn't mean that they love you. Real love is based on 1 Corinthians 13. Okay, and so kids need to understand what the difference is between safe love and unsafe, healthy versus unhealthy, and abuse and addictive love. Because once they get them in with this love, once they get them in with this false relationship, Rich, then they give them the drugs. Then the work is done and they don't have to work anymore. And then the girls are left feeling betrayed and brokenhearted. I felt betrayed. I never got paid any amount of money for the exchange of my body. I thought these were my friends. I thought these were people that loved me and cared about me. And then once they gave me cocaine, that addiction, was overwhelming. But the men that came showed me love. And I didn't have love from my dad. So I didn't know the difference. And it was addicting. That love can be more addicting than any drug.
From someone that's on the outside of this thing, I was looking at this and I was thinking, I don't have children. But I will say this, that I have this niece, and I have several nieces, but I have one niece in particular. Like, I have close relationships with a lot of my nieces and nephews, but there was my niece. I used to post pictures with her on my social media when she was a kid, and when I was competing at the time, and it got to the point where there was some kind of like weird comments that came across social. So I decided to pull down all the personal, like, family pics that I had, including stuff with her, because it just made me like, I'm uneasy about this. And that's the whole point. When you have the ability with this phone, like we talked about, like, you can take photos, and most people keep their location services on their phone on. And that location service can actually not only tell, for example, a predator what address you're at, but it can tell that predator like what room of the house you're in. And so in looking at your your story, I thought about this in two sets of people that are on the outside of this. Obviously, there are these homes that are similar to your homes, that are broken homes, where sexual abuse has already gone on, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and this is a really, really bad home where obviously a child like you is going to go look for validation somewhere else. But then there's the other kind of home, which is a large portion of the homes in the United States right now with the divorce rate, where you grew up in a home like I grew up in. I wasn't not loved. I didn't have validation from my parents, but maybe I didn't get enough of it because they were so busy working. They were so out of tune with what I had going on a daily basis. I never had a curfew. Fortunately, I was a kid that was always in bed at the right time and maintained honor roll and all that kind of stuff. But I never had any of those things. So I had so much freedom to do what I want. And if you don't get enough validation at home, even if you live in a good environment, because people are so busy, jobs become priority, making bills become priority, and these things are important. But it's about, prioritizing what is the most important in your life. And suddenly when 6, 7, 8 months go by and both parents are so focused on putting food on the table that a child subconsciously begins to feel like, well, I'm not the priority anymore. They're going to look for that prioritization, that validation, that love outside of the home. And I just thought, like, there's so many children that are growing up in a situation like what I grew up in that could fall prey to this entire industry. And parents that would be completely just oblivious to this because their kids are coming home every day, not realizing that they're being pulled out of third bell, returned by fifth bell, turning tricks for these pimps at school. And the thought of that is just, mind blowing.
Absolutely. And I'll just echo that. The first girl that the FBI ever brought me in to work with about 11 or 12 years ago, she came from a law enforcement family. Both of her parents worked in law enforcement, but she was the one behind bars. And she was sitting there. They didn't want her to go to jail, but she wouldn't give up the name of the pimp. And when I was brought in as a survivor to talk to her, the FBI said, would you just try to talk some sense into her, try to help her? And I explained to her, I said, you have two loving parents that care for you. You live in a gated community. You have want for nothing. What are you doing? And she wanted freedom. She wanted a sense of freedom that this pimp gave her by making her feel like she was an adult because she came from a strict household. And I'm not here to judge strict households at all, but you have to have a balance of love with boundaries. Otherwise, a relationship without boundaries and without rules will breed rebellion. And so you have to have the relationship part of it too. So these parents were kind of missing that because they were working the 40-hour, 60-hour shifts and they didn't have the relationship. And that's where they would have found out, that she really wanted some freedom. She really needed freedom. She needed to feel like she wasn't always, towing the line like military families. Anyway, it took me explaining to her that this older man who is setting up the dates was getting paid and who was behind bars. So yeah, when she realized he was getting paid, because pimps get paid a portion for every trick. So let's say if it's $150 for 1 hour with a child that he sets up, he might give a middle schooler $50 and she feels like she's rich, but he got $100.
Yeah.
And when the police came, she was the one that was arrested because of what you said earlier. They think of these girls who look over 18 like they are prostituting voluntarily. And she felt like she was in control of her life. She believed all the lies and manipulation this guy had told her and had developed a relationship with him, a romantic relationship. Meanwhile, he got off scot-free and she was sitting in jail. And so the FBI and her parents had brought me in to come and help her. And when I explained to her, he's getting paid. And meanwhile, you're behind bars. So who's getting played here? And it was then that she realized that she was paying for the consequences of his actions, him setting up the dates. He was making most of the money and he was getting off scot-free. And it was then that she realized, she said, he's getting paid while I'm getting played, that the light bulb went off.
Why doesn't the light bulb go off sooner when with these kids? For example, when you entered this ring, there's this moment of where you feel like, oh, this person loves me, but then they're asking you to be with somebody else. And you talk about how you're willing to do whatever you need, like to prove your love for this person, you'll do whatever you need to do. Like if this is what they want you to do, you'll do this. But it seems to me, that even in a child's mind that there would be a part of them that says like, no, because having sex with all these people is not right. And how does that switch not flip on?
Right. Absolutely. And I talk about that in my book. That's when I ran away from the brothel in middle school, because I realized that the guy who I thought loved me, the John that showed me so much kindness. I mean, he was a father, for goodness sakes. He had daughters my age, but he showed me this love. And I thought he was my boyfriend. I didn't understand the whole trafficking thing. And I ran away. I escaped because there are mean people. They're enforcer. He was very mean. And, that locked us up in the apartment. So when I got away, they came looking for me. And I told my friend who was in it with me, I said, listen, they're lying to us. I know they're lying to us. This isn't love. For him to have sex with you and to have sex with me is not love. I may not know a lot of things, but I know that they're not telling us the truth. And what's happening here isn't real. And all of a sudden, I hate to say it again and again, but your frontal lobe is not fully developed when you're 14. You don't understand that this is a business. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you're just a commodity. But unfortunately, children who are vulnerable in the United States are tens, they're a dime a dozen. You can get them on any corner, unfortunately, because there's not enough shows like yours. There's not enough books like mine. There's not enough interviews with survivors to tell people how rampant this is.
Two things that come to play here that you mentioned, and I want to touch on both of them. Number one is that you talked about John being a father. He had a daughter your age, and you talked about the evolution of the sex trafficking industry and how you're at a point now where girls that have been trafficked previously have now grown up and been groomed to be recruiters for younger girls. And so you have generations of people that have been sex trafficked that now have families that are grooming their own children and other people's children to live in these sex trafficking industries. Because I would imagine that if you're a female, let's take you for example, say you never actually escaped this lifestyle. And because at one point in time, somebody was grooming you to become a recruiter. And if at that point you continued believing into the lie and you became that recruiter, it could go so far as to now you have your kids, Kipper and Diana, where you would groom them into living this lifestyle because you wouldn't see anything wrong with it.
You don't know how much that breaks my heart to hear you say that, because 10 years ago, I saw this coming. I saw this coming with one of the girls that I worked with in the juvenile jail system. And I said, her baby daddy is a pimp. He's the pimp. And she's going to wind up marrying him if we don't help her. And so the system at that time was arresting minors for prostitution. And she eventually got rearrested as an adult. She was 17 when I met her. And when she got rearrested, she was charged. And I talked to the FBI and I said, listen, I worked with this girl. She was a minor when she was recruited. Please help her. Please have understanding, have mercy on her, because she was a victim. And now she has a child with the trafficker. And I saw that becoming our new norm, that children were having children with pimps and making a family and normalizing. It's bad enough. It's normalized in our society with music and movies and the entire world industry, over-sexualization of young women and now young men. And unfortunately, there's a market for it. And that market, that industry drives this much more than the need for justice at the moment.
When you talk about this normalization, I think about the over-sexualization of things. Oh man, I could go on for days about the entertainment industry, like Hollywood and music and all this kind of stuff. It's just,
you don't want to know what goes on there, because I worked in LA for a while. It's horrific.
I moved out to LA for a couple of years, and I was out there taking acting lessons, and that seemed to be a good transition for me after I was done competing as an athlete. And I just was like, this is not an industry I want to be part of. Not like that. This over sexualization of things, like you see this younger generation now, the social media generation, these kids that are making these TikTok videos and stuff. And I even see it with nieces and nephews. Like I have some nieces and nephews that I've known them since they were born, and now I have like girls that are, my nieces that are in their early 20s, late teens, and they post some of these pictures, and I'll be flipping through Instagram and I'll come to like my niece's Instagram page and I'm like, I don't want to like this photo. Like, this is a photo of her and her friends on the beach in a semi-sexual kind of pose where I'm like, I'm that uncle and I I can't like this thing, but I don't want to not like it because I don't want her to be offended. But I see this. And so in the book, you talk about how these kids now, they're recruited on platforms like Facebook, like, social media platforms, sugar daddy, stuff like that. Like talk about how these platforms are used, because a lot of parents don't regulate. They don't see the need to regulate their children's, internet activity and stuff like that, just for reasons of just they're being naive. They don't know any better. And so talk about how these platforms are being used to recruit these kids.
There are so many fake personas on social media, and TikTok in particular is full of pedophiles. It's full of pedophiles. You do not know who these people are that you are being enticed with. For the young people out there that are making the dancing videos that are cute, but in your half-dressed outfit, no, because you don't know who they are. They're following you because they are pedophiles. And so parents need to understand how important it is to, number one, educate your child, and number two, be that example to them. It starts in the home. Be that love example. Be that example to them in your own life, and then educate them on what is safe and unsafe, and what is safe and healthy internet practices, because you don't want to entice the wrong person who is going to latch onto your child and groom them to the point that you cannot even get them away from that evil person. No matter how hard you try, the addiction will be so great that you yourself will lose your job, your mental sanity, your livelihood, your entire world will be turned upside down. I've seen it happen over and over and over again because these guys are so good at it. But what happens to the parents? You suffer. You suffer when you see your child entrapped in this terrible world, in this terrible cycle, and you find out what it is, and you can't help them because they won't listen anymore. And now they're addicted to heroin, and now they're addicted to coke. They can't get off the drug. They can't get free. And no matter what you do, you can't get them back. It starts with setting boundaries in the home, on the phone, on the internet, having that discussion. Do the deed and have the talk. Get the book. Share this podcast, have the discussion with them, and don't be afraid. Be a parent.
I think it was mentioned in the book, but in one of the interviews, it was talked about that the sex trafficking industry is the second most gross profiting industry in the world, somewhere around 150 or 160 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. But obviously with this being so profitable, what percentage of kids that are pulled into the sex trafficking industry at this point in time are first contacted via internet, via some sort of social media platform, be it Facebook, TikTok, whatever? Do you know what percentage of these kids are actually initially contacted that way?
Well, I can tell you, we worked with my nonprofit, There's Hope for Me, worked with the Thorn Foundation, Ashton Kutcher's foundation, that they did two grant cycles, two survey cycles, where in 2012, they surveyed trying to figure that very question out. And then the report came out 2015 and 2019. They're both on my website, there's hopeforme.org. So under the interview tab, so you can see it there. And there was, I would say, the majority of kids in 2012 were introduced through friends, but there was a small percentage that was introduced through the internet. When the report finally came out in 2015, by the time 2018 came around, I would say probably closer. I don't know the exact, so I don't want to quote the wrong statistic, but I do know it jumped up tremendously. To the amount, at least 50% were recruited online through social media apps.
50% of the entire sex trafficking industry were recruited on initial contact made online.
Yeah.
Is this an international phenomenon, or are you talking here in the U.S. or do you not?
In the U.S.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and for verification of those statistics, again, it's the Thorn report that came out in 2000. It was done in 2018, came out in 2019. I believe it was 50%. And we were the second or third in the nation, largest of helping survivors and reporting survivors of for this phenomenon. And the girls that we worked with, and boys, and trans, whatever they identified with, all were willing to take part in this survey. And they said that 50% of them said that it was through some social media contact, through Instagram, through a false friend on Instagram. Instagram famous does not always mean that they're really famous. A lot of people are drawn to popularity because of drama, not because you've actually done anything with your life that makes you famous. So, you can buy followers on Instagram. Come on.
Yeah.
Kids have to be smarter than that. So, just because you're popular on social media doesn't mean you're safe.
Yeah. You say kids have to be smarter than that, but I sit here and think no, parents have to be smarter than that, because like you said, the frontal lobe isn't fully developed of a young kid anyway. And yeah, they do need to be smarter than that, but it starts off with little things. I can't stand seeing a 2-year-old with a tablet in her hand, right? Like, it's because even though the parents lining up the little video for them on YouTube to keep them satiated, it's just the beginning of like that belief of like, hey, it's okay for you to go ahead and use this thing for the internet, and it only steps into a much bigger process. So I always say that, like, parents need to be smarter than that. And as a parent, if you're out there listening, like, you need to educate yourself on this kind of stuff and be able to look for those signs, or be able to know, like, I should have those parental controls on my kid's cell phone, or my child shouldn't have access to the internet like that, because you literally, like, I was a good kid, and I still made a lot of stupid decisions as a kid, right? Like, and this is a kid who knows, like, I had clear boundaries. I knew what right and wrong was. Like, I had a father who was a disciplinarian and stuff like that. Like, but still, like, when the cat's away, the mice will play, and you're going to make bad decisions. And it only takes like that one bad decision to suddenly take you off that course in life, and you're getting dragged down this path. And I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's like, you can go like the young lady that you talked about growing up in that gated community. You can go from that to being addicted to heroin and turning sex tricks in a month. In a month, like you said, the grooming period lasts a month, and that's all it takes for something like that to happen. And these are normal kids. And so this is what really drew me into your book. When I was reading this, I was like, wow, man, this is not some young girl who was exiting the mall because she got off of her, she quit working her job at Auntie Anne's at 9 p.m. when the mall closed and it was dark outside, and got chloroformed in the parking lot. Like, it doesn't just happen like that. This is, these kids are operating right in their neighborhoods. They're coming home at night and stuff. And just crazy to me. I want to take a step back, because this is going to actually tie into the organization that your There's Hope for Me organization that you have. But talk to me. One of the things that really grabbed me in the book was your faith. And, this has been a central theme throughout the conversation, but you talked about, at a young age, going to a Billy Graham Crusade. I can't imagine how many lives that man has touched. Like, what, it's just unbelievable. But you went to a Billy Graham Crusade. I'm guessing that was somewhere around circa 1985-ish or something like that. And I ask you about this because I literally probably listen to one Billy Graham sermon every day of my life. Like, typically I'll wake up in the morning, and before I get out of bed, like, I'll start that Billy Graham sermon, lay there for about 15 minutes, and then continue listening to it as I get up and wash my face and stuff like that. I didn't this morning, full disclaimer, but yeah, I do this quite often. And so when you said that about Billy Graham, like, I was like, wow. So talk to me about that, the listeners, about that Billy Graham experience, and how that even though you went through this whole sex trafficking situation, like, God was always present in your life.
Yes, and he always is. And I am so grateful that I get to share that with survivors and with others, and in broadcast, because at 13 years old, I found myself being drugged and feeling like, oh my gosh, I am going to die here at 13 because they had drugged me.
For the timeline, though, this was post Crusade. Like, you had already come forward.
Right. I had just gotten saved, but it was real because I passed out. I remember my last thought as I'm falling to the floor and they're driving away. They left me for dead on the side of the road. I remember thinking, I am going to die at 13 in this gravel parking lot, and nobody knows I'm here. And I passed out. And But because I had received Jesus at a Billy Graham Crusade, I remember sensing God speak to my heart. Even though I didn't have a lot of church, I had Jesus.
Yeah.
I had Jesus in my heart. And I knew that that voice was God. And I just said, help me, help me. Even in the hotel room before they kidnapped me, when they started negotiating my price, and Mary told the John, how much will you pay for her? And he said 500. She said, no, I want 550. She's a virgin. I remember God speaking to my heart and the words of Billy Graham coming to my heart. God will never leave you or forsake you. And I remember standing up and fighting back. And that's what set me free. I said a little prayer in the hotel room and they got mad and they kicked us out. Yes, they wound up kidnapping me, drugging me, and I experienced attempted murder. But even there, God didn't leave me. And he did not forsake me. And I was able to get up. When I heard him say, get up, he gave me the strength to get up and walk to this payphone. And I was able to call the hotel, and the hotel where we were staying at, where my mom was. And they were able to locate my mom, and she found me on the side of the road. They asked me if I saw lights, if I saw water, and that's how they were able to find me. Unfortunately, my mom is no longer with me. I'm looking at her picture now. She passed away last year, but she left that legacy with me of trusting in God and knowing Jesus. And that love for the Lord, what became so real in my life, because he truly saved me, like physically saved me from death, which they planned for me more than once. They sold me to another trafficking ring, as you read in the book, sold me to a guy with AIDS. I never contracted any AIDS disease or sexually transmitted disease, thank God, but they planned it for me. And what the enemy plans for evil, God can turn around for good. Hallelujah. He took this life, and I was messed up. I wasn't a good kid. I was angry. I was rebellious. I was, so upset that my school gave up on me, that I felt like everyone around me gave up on me because I had become a drug addict, because I became addicted. As the cycle went, and I continued hanging around the wrong people, I felt like even my mom had given up on me, but God never gave up on me. And truthfully, my mom never stopped praying for me, because God did redeem my life at the right time. And that redemption is what I share with survivors of human trafficking. Yes, I wound up marrying into the Colombian cartel, and that was a 20-year abusive marriage.
Hold on. You just dropped that comment like, yes, I did end up marrying into the Colombian cartel. If you haven't read the book, that's something you just dropped that like, yeah. So yeah, I did end up marrying to the Colombian cartel. No big deal. Moving on. So as God would have it, like you can't just, you can't just drop a comment like that. Look, we're going to skip over the Colombian cartel for the listeners, you guys out there. You can check it out in the book. I'll say this, like, number one, thoughts on this is like, there are a lot of people that live in these jagged situations where it's like, man, I've done so much in my life that what would God have to do with me, right? I mean, your life is the epitome of that, and it's as the good book says, where sin did abound, grace did much more abound, right?
Hallelujah. Amen.
And so that's the first thing. Like, you're never too far deep in life. You've never made too many bad decisions to turn your life to Christ.
There is hope for everyone, is the point.
What's amazing to me, I've traveled all over the world. I've met a lot of different people, and it seems to me that, and the Bible talks about this, it seems to me that the people that go through the most tribulations in their life are the people that have the strongest faith. And just with this particular thing, Elizabeth Smart, like, her faith is what got her through her situation. Chandra, what we're on to, her faith is what got through her situation. I about cried when I was reading her book, and she talked about forgiveness. When we talked about that, Lord of mercy. And then, the same with you. There was never a point in your life where you always kept saying in the book, like, God will never forsake me. He will never leave me. And because that is what you heard at the Billy Graham Crusade. But why isn't it? Why? Because you run into this question all the time. why does God let good things happen to bad people? Why does God let people get raped? Why does God let this, like, why do bad things have to happen to you? Why is it in your life that you never actually turned and was like, really, God, like blamed him for what was going on in your life? Because that seems to be, this seems to be something that people that don't believe struggle with.
Oh my gosh, Rich. And that is only up until 2014 when I wrote the book. You have no idea what I've been through since then. God has been faithful. I had cancer. I currently have a heart aneurysm, which could burst at any time. But I'm thankful because God has given me life. I'm a survivor. I'm surviving every day. Every day I get to give God praise. And you know what? If he chooses to take me today, I know that I lived my life for his glory and his honor. And I know that I will meet him face to face with no regrets. And in fact, I'm taking a whole bunch of survivors with me because every survivor that I meet, I tell them about the love and the hope, the love of Jesus, the hope that I found in him that will never give up on you. No matter what the world does, God will never, ever give up on you. And I'm living proof of that, going from a GED to a PhD.
The reason why I'm going down this is because it's easy, like there's like a lot of people that be listening. It's like, oh, they're preaching Jesus. Like, where's the rubber meet the pavement, right? And so a precursor to your There's Hope for Me organization, one of the things that I read in the book that I definitely wanted to touch on is the ministries that you started setting up and doing. When you started working with some of the churches that you worked with, you had a ministry where you started going out to truck stops and talking to people, truckers and different people in those situations about looking for the signs. And you can read the book to get the details on that. But I just want to fast forward to, you actually set up a ministry where you started going to strip clubs and witnessing to strippers and giving free Bibles. And what blew my mind was when you said we would just to show acts of love, like the kinds of things that you would do to show these, because obviously you got to gain trust and all that kind of stuff. And you're gaining trust, like you're a groomer. That's what you are. You're a groomer and a recruiter, but you're a groomer and a recruiter for Jesus. But
for good things.
Yeah, exactly. You guys were doing a ministry where you were actually like, you would sit these strippers down and wash their feet, which was so mind-blowing to me, because we can sit here on this show and we can quote scripture all day long and we can talk about Christ's love and all that, but it's not real to some people. And when I read that, I'm like, this is where the rubber meets the pavement. As I said, you guys are going into these clubs and showing these girls love, and you're sitting there like washing their feet and witnessing to them and giving them free Bibles. And the number of women that you pulled out of these strip clubs, for example, was crazy to me. And this is, ultimately, we can get into these debates about whether God exists. We can talk about whether Jesus had a beard or not, and we can religion creates so much diversity and strife amongst people and all that kind of stuff. But it was real simple in the New Testament. Christ's 2 words: love the Lord your God with all your heart, might, and soul, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. And when I see that, that's the ultimate act of loving your neighbor. And if everybody lived life that way, if everybody truly prioritize those in need, prioritize those that, required help, that were in a bad situation, that love their neighbor as much as them. And I saw, when I read that, I was like, this that is a true testament of what your faith is. You can quote your scriptures in your book all you want. You can talk about going to the Billy Graham Crusade. I think it's a strong testament of your faith that you never actually questioned God, like what's going on, or blamed him. But the fact that at the end of this whole thing, the love that you show for these survivors was amazing to me.
Thank you. Yes, it's that love that God showed us that I'm able to love others with. I know everybody has their own personal experience and feels the presence of God in their own way differently, and I respect that. However, for me, it was real. Like, he literally raised me from the dead when they tried to kill me when I was 13. He literally saved me when my boyfriend got shot in a drive-by shooting in a gang. He literally saved me from getting AIDS. He had to do it the hard way. Let me just explain something real quick, because you might identify with this, but I was hard. Like, I had to learn firsthand that God was real, because you know what? I made the mistake of saying, you know what, God, if you're real, show me. Show me. And yeah,
No.
yeah. And he did. And you know what he does to this day, every day, like I said, yeah, sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back and you make mistakes, but you keep going and God is right there with you, holding your hand, showing you love. If you even just call on the name of Jesus, I promise you, I guarantee you, he will show up. If you ask him to show himself real to you, be prepared, because it's not going to be an easy life and he may not show you the way you want, but he will prove himself to be real. Every day that I'm alive is a gift. And I recognize that. I can't understand why people would give away that gift, through suicide, when I have had to my entire life fight to survive every day. Like I said, I've been diagnosed for 3 months with a 5.1 heart aneurysm that I could go any day. Sorry, that's another one of those, just kind of by the way, because this is my life, is a living testimony. And I've come to grips with it to understand that God has chosen this vessel to bring glory to his name. And it's not for me to question. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful. And he takes care of my needs and he loves me and he shows me how valuable I am every day that I'm alive. I can't believe he still loves me in spite of me. He still loves me.
It's awesome hearing you fired up about this. I think it's just the energy, I'll say this, when I changed the subject, there was earlier on in our conversation, there was this heartfelt moment and I thought like, oh gosh, she's going to start crying. And I didn't want to make you cry today. I didn't want, but I could tell you were getting emotional. And the moment I mentioned the Lord, you were like, your face went from, oh, like, let me talk about that for a second. I was like, oh, this is great. This is great.
Thank you.
Talk to me about your organization. There's Hope for Me. Talk about this organization and talk about some of the programs that you guys have and what it is that you do.
So when I first started, I used to do outreach, like I mentioned, to the schools, to the jails, to the strip clubs. And by the way, I love strip club outreach. That was my favorite because you literally see the hand of God. I mean, in your face, you see the devil fighting you and you see God. We would go out into the audience even at one point and start witnessing to the patrons. And one guy said, my brother who's a pastor sent you, I know it. And he started crying. And I was like, we don't know your brother, but we know the man he serves, we know the one he serves.
That's awesome. I can't imagine being in a strip club. I can't imagine being in a strip club about to buy a lap dance. And then you or some walking up to me like, do you know the Lord Jesus Christ is your personal savior? I'd be like, come, you're ruining it. I can't. So go ahead.
My night's ruined. It's done. Yeah. And then the manager got saved while this little girl was on the pole.
I'm surprised that the managers let you in these clubs because obviously, I mean, they need to make money. And you coming in talking about Jesus is not exactly increasing strip club profit, I'm sure.
It's all in the approach, So we don't forget about them. We bring them gifts. We bring the managers gifts. We learned, what the managers liked. For anybody that's looking to do strip club outreach, find out what their favorite chocolate is. and so we would love on them too, because they need Jesus too. At one point, there was one club that was run by the mob, which I didn't realize until I later on found out. And the manager, he had moved from another club. So he really liked me because I gave him his favorite chocolate. And he said, look, I can't let you in this one. And I said, okay, if I understand that, I don't want to get you in trouble. I said, but would you hand out the Bibles for me? And he said, okay, just give me the Bibles. I was like, great, even better. The managers are now doing the Lord's work. And he started handing out the Bibles to the girls for me. So, there's a will and a way. But of course, we would also go in with a sheet of the missing girls in South Florida, their pictures, and look for them, look for minors, so that we could do our covert work at the same time as doing the Lord's work. So they never suspected anything, whether we were washing their feet or bringing them clothes or gifts for their children. We were also looking for missing children and minors in the clubs. And as a result, we have helped so many people come out of trafficking. And so I'm grateful that God has bore so much fruit in this ministry that they've wanted to stick around. And it's not because they're getting paid or that they are getting some other benefit. They have a heart for this, and God has chosen them. God has chosen the ones who would be part of it. So I have more survivors than I can count, who are just now willing to step up and do the same. And that's what discipleship is all about. That's what God calls us to do, to make disciples. So I tell them, go do the same thing that I taught you, that I did for you. Go do that for others now. And that's what my mom did for me. And so that legacy is continuing.
But there is hope for me. Your organization also offers like tutoring, like sessions, like for people to be able to earn their GEDs, helping with schooling and stuff like that. What other programs do you guys offer? Because I was looking at it online before, but I don't have the list in front of me now.
Right. So, well, we've helped a lot of survivors get their driver's license, get their GED, and even go to college. And some of them get scholarships. One of the major components that I really believe in is this idea of discipleship and being a mentor to other survivors. So paying it forward. As a result, I'm a life coach through the American Association of Christian Counselors, and we offer that as a gift to our survivor leaders that want to carry it forward and become a life coach. So a lot of girls have taken that up and they've become life coaches and leaders because it does not require a degree, and it can actually become a profession, which now is being seen as a profession. So I started that, like 8 years ago. And a lot of girls are becoming life coaches. So some of them, they do not want to be leaders. They don't want to be public speakers. They just want to live their life, and we'll continue to support them. So we used to do small groups, but there's so many girls and boys that are scattered all over the state. And then I started working in LA. So I have survivors in LA. I have survivors in Miami. So now it's just, I've turned the tables and used social media as a way to connect with survivors and continue to mentor survivors. And we continue to mentor even through the pandemic. We would do Zoom meetings and mentoring and support and Bible study and things like that to give the girls and boys hope. But I still do believe very strongly in collaborating with law enforcement, because I've seen that to become a deterrent from them doing any future activity in the commercial sex industry. And as a result, they've worked with law enforcement and turned the tables on the traffickers and become advocates instead. And the FBI is excellent in working with survivors and helping them feel dignified. So we've had nothing but success in that and seeing successful prosecutions as well.
Okay, so somebody's listening to the show right now. They're sitting there thinking, like, I would like to get involved. How do I get involved? Obviously, you can go to there'shopeforme.org, your website.
Yeah.
And then for somebody like me, I'm sitting here listening to this podcast on my way to work, and I think, man, but what could I do? What can somebody do when they get involved? Like when somebody contacts you, what kind of stuff are they going to get involved in?
Number one, get educated. I would say purchase a copy of Stolen, share this podcast, learn as much as you can about the issue, and get involved first and foremost in your own child's life. Make sure that your family is secure. Make sure your family is knowledgeable. Make sure your children are empowered and aware of the dangers. And then pray. Pray for us, pray for our survivors. People can donate through the website. People can pray for specific needs. People can buy the book and become educated. But in your own community is where you're going to find hands-on work, because every community has trafficking. So getting involved in our organization, like I said, ours is specifically from survivors to survivors. So it's not a hands-on for people that have not experienced trafficking.
If somebody, let's say, like, for example, somebody is, living in Chicago, they're listening to this podcast and they think, oh, I want to get involved. Do they have the ability to come to your website? Do you have a network, for example, where they can say, hey, I'm from Chicago. Who could I get involved with here, where you could get them involved with somebody? Do you have that kind of infrastructure network built in?
Yes. And everyone has a part to play. So I don't want to dissuade anyone just because our organization is primarily for survivors, but there is something everyone can do about human trafficking. So if you go on our website under the interview tab, there is an HHS link, which is the Department of Health and Human Services. And on their website, it does give a list of the task forces around the country. And so you can plug into your local human trafficking task force, whether it's in Chicago or South Florida. And there you will find many, many wonderful ways of helping. You can donate clothing. You can write notes to the kids, to the survivors. That is one thing we do encourage. But there are many, many ways people can get involved in their local community. And that's what I try to encourage people, because there's not enough hands and feet doing the work. The Bible says that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I don't want to take away the workers from another area that really, really needs it. So look for your state's anti-trafficking efforts and get involved. And if you're looking for a nonprofit, look for one that is survivor-led, because that is going to be the most effective. That's where survivors stick to, if it's survivor-led, survivor-informed, and survivor sensitive.
I want to say this. You say, and get educated and show in the book Stolen. That was not some sort of plug just for the book. I really think that this is a good book to educate you as to what's going on here, because my eyes were completely opened. I really thought that when I thought of sex trafficking, I was thinking of abductions and girls tied in basements or brothels or whatever. And to see how this happens and the way that you break this down there, when you talk about families being sex traffickers, like, these sex trafficking families can live in affluent neighborhoods. They could literally be your neighbors. And you may not even know it. You wouldn't know, like, people coming and going, and there are other locations where these girls are taken and stuff like that. And it's just one of those things where the more educated you are about this, you will realize, like, wow, this is happening right. It can be happening right in front of your face, and it could be possibly happening to your kid. And so stay in tune with your kid and stuff like that. And just these tips of educating yourself. And obviously, the overall message that I got from reading your book essentially was, like, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as the old proverb goes. And that, it's about being able to identify these things, because you're not trying to, obviously there's always going to be survivors, but it would be much better if you could stop these problems rather than fix them on the back end by working with survivors. If you woke up tomorrow and never had another survivor to work with because you were able to prevent everyone from going through that, that's ideally what the messaging in the book was about, educating yourself so that you can stop this from happening before it happens, rather than having to work with survivors on the back end.
Wow, that's so good. Absolutely. And the other thing is, don't assume that just because you are in an affluent neighborhood, you go to church, that trafficking isn't happening right where you live. You and I both know, and as we were speaking beforehand, the UFC community just had an unveiling of somebody in that community who is a child predator for child pornography. And not to bring glamour to that individual, but there are always predators among us. So you have to be wise. Even in the church that I used to go to when my daughter was in high school, it was a very affluent neighborhood. There was a trafficker that lived in an 18,000 square foot mansion that was trafficking girls, would go to McDonald's. And the way I found out about it was his wife was in Bible study with me. He didn't go to church. His wife was in Bible study, and she heard me share my testimony. And she said, my husband has been doing this.
It's sad to say, but it's like, you can't trust people that you think that you otherwise would be able to trust. These aren't the would-be burglars with the black mask on that are breaking into your house in the middle of the night, and they're the obvious people. Like, these people are not even hiding. They're just walking around in plain daylight, and it's almost as arrogant as flaunting it right in front of your face. That's how common this is. So listen, Kat, I appreciate you coming on. One last time, the name of the book is Stolen: The True Story of the Sex Trafficking Survivor. Where can the listeners get it?
They can go to our website, www.there'shopeforme.org, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or our website for an autographed copy.
This is good stuff, Kat. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing your story. I know that there's a balance in life between you've built an entire, I don't want to call it a business, but this is your cause, is what the cause of that you do. And you said that you have become a vessel for God. But every time that you have to do one of these interviews, I realize that you're basically reliving this past of yours, while at the same time also possibly helping people. So I appreciate you emotionally dragging yourself through that in order to put a positive message out there.
Thank you. You're the first podcast host ever to recognize that. So I appreciate it because I've done numerous interviews. So thank you for saying that, Rich. And I just want to give one last word. If this has happened to you or someone you know, or you suspect human trafficking, just know it's not your fault and there's hope for you. You can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-3737, 888, and report it anonymously. But don't give up on yourself, because I can promise you I'm living proof that God will never give up on you.
Kat, you put a smile on my face. Thanks for coming on today.
Love you all. God bless.
Quite Franklin is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor legal advice, nor a statement of Quite Franklin policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of that product or entity by Rich Franklin or Quite Franklin. The views expressed by guests on the podcast are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Quite Franklin employees or representatives are the views and opinions of the persons expressing them, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Quite Franklin or any of its officials or principals. Nothing heard on this podcast at any time is medical advice or is intended as medical advice. The listener must always consult his or her personal physician or other qualified medical professional regarding any questions of a medical nature. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact our general counsel.